Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this event presented in the American Inspiration Author Series. It's great to have you with us tonight in the land of history, exploring colonial America, its golden age of piracy, and the life of one woman who married in. I'm Margaret Talcott, Director of Literary Programs at American Ancestors, New England Historic Genealogical Society, and producer of the American Inspiration Author Series. On your screen is the schedule for our hour-long event featuring Daphne Palmer Geanacopoulos and her new book, The Pirate's Wife, the remarkable true story of Sarah Kidd. We're fortunate today that Dr. Geanacopoulos will present to us in full with illustrations for 30 to 35 minutes before addressing your questions. She'll get started in a moment, but for now, please know that we are in a Zoom webinar format, which means your microphone is muted and your video is off. We can't take your comments in the chat box, but do look there for relevant information and helpful links. We asked for your questions as you registered. If you have additional queries, enter them into the Q&A box at the base of your screen. We'll get to as many as we can. A video of tonight's program is being made by my colleagues in our Brew Family Learning Center. The link will be emailed in the day ahead when it's available on the American Inspiration Video Archive. Of course, the real education and enlightenment comes from reading this wonderful book by Dr. Geanacopoulos. The Pirate's Wife, the remarkable true story of Sarah Kidd, is available for purchase through our partners at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a remarkable work of history based on a collection of documents accessed on both sides of the Atlantic. It represents history as experienced by a woman, from a woman's perspective, and written by a woman, all of which is rare related to colonial times. I really enjoyed it. Again, use the code AMINS23 as you order if you would like a copy signed for yourself or as a gift. Now, turning to introductions, Dr. Daphne Palmer Geanacopoulos is an historian, journalist, and an author of many works on piracy and women, including the book, The Pirate Next Door, the untold story of 18th-century pirates' wives, families, and communities. Her writing has appeared in such publications as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Southern Living, Virginia Business, and other outlets. In the last 15 years, she has conducted extensive original research in London, Washington, New York, Rhode Island, and in Massachusetts archives. Her pursuit has centered on pirates and their wives. Dr. Geanacopoulos has dedicated her life to shining light on the stories of such forgotten women as Sarah Kidd. Daphne, we are delighted you're here tonight. I know in the past week, you've been at Mystic Seaport in Connecticut, conducting pirate-related programs, and also at Trinity Church in New York, visiting Sarah Kidd's and her family's grave, places of real special interest to me and my New York family. All of us family historians on tonight, old New Englanders and New Yorkers, we are really eager to hear from you. So I truly thank you for making time in your schedule to be with us tonight. Let's get started. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for that nice introduction. Thank you to American Ancestors for hosting this evening tonight. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. This event is especially meaningful to me because I'm a member of American Ancestors, I'm on the council, and I did research for The Pirate's Wife in the American Ancestors Library. I also hired one of the skilled genealogists to fact-check my work. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak to you tonight about a book I've been working on for many years. It is the first ever direct account of the life of Sarah Kidd, the wife of the notorious pirate Captain Kidd. Sarah lived a long and storied life, and I'm going to give you a glimpse into it. I hope you all will find Sarah Kidd to be easily as interesting and remarkable as her famous husband. Generations of readers the world over have known the story of Captain William Kidd, the noble sea captain and privateer who turned ruthless pirate. The history of the Golden Age of Piracy, in which Captain Kidd played an outsized part, is replete with the exploits of pirates of many stripes, who hoisted the black flag and prowled the seas, attacking 17th and 18th century merchant vessels bound for the West Indies, West Africa, and North America. Kidd's story is particularly striking. In 1699, Captain Kidd became the subject of a deadly political scandal involving top officials on both sides of the Atlantic, including the King of England. There was a worldwide chase, an eventual conviction and execution at the hands of colonial officials who may have been complicit in Captain Kidd's darkest acts of piracy. It was a drama laced with lies, secrets, double dealing, betrayal, and buried treasure. The story of his journey from privateer to murderous pirate has been immortalized across the centuries in print, on stage and screen, in video games, and even in an epic 22-verse ballad. But our understanding of his legend is incomplete. What is largely unknown is that Kidd had a partner and accomplice, a behind-the-scenes player who enabled his plundering and helped him outpace his enemies. This accomplice was his wife, the English-born Sarah Kidd, a young, well-to-do New York socialite whose extraordinary life is a lesson in reinvention and resourcefulness. Sarah was running a thriving merchant business in the New York City seaport when she met Captain Kidd. The encounter set off a high-octane romance that often operated outside the law. While Captain Kidd was plundering the high seas, Sarah Kidd was pirating in her own way, within the confines of polite society, working to ensure her husband never got caught and that the location of his buried treasure stayed secret. With bold determination to survive and to protect her husband, Sarah secretly aided and abetted her husband, fighting alongside him against his accusers. The most impressive part is that even after Captain Kidd was put to death for his crimes, Sarah remained an incredibly beloved figure of the community, securing a long and prosperous life for herself and her children. Sarah knew how to persuade, and she knew how to hustle. And in a time when women have little legal power, she found a way to ensure her future and to protect her family. But for more than 300 years, the story of Sarah Kidd has been all but erased from history. My journey into the world of pirates began in 2002, when I was commissioned by the New York Times to write a freelance piece for their museum's special section about the Whydah Pirate Museum in Cape Cod. The museum contains the artifacts recovered from the Whydah pirate ship that crashed during a fierce nor'easter off the coast of Wellfleet, Cape Cod in 1717. Prior to writing this article, I didn't know much about pirates, except what I had read in books and seen in movies. I thought all pirates had a pet parrot, like Long John Silver in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, or looked like the handsome and fit Errol Flynn in the 1935 movie Captain Blood, or more recently, walked, talked, and wore eyeshadow like Jack Sparrow in the movies Pirates of the Caribbean. Looking at the everyday artifacts recovered from the pirate ship, silver coins, cutlery, pewter plates, a teapot with the shoulder blade of a pirate, pistols, cannon, navigational instruments, medical supplies, and even a size 5 leg bone shoe, a size 5 shoe, leg bone, and silk stocking, I realized that these mythological figures were mere ordinary men. The legend of the captain Samuel Bellamy and his love interest Maria Hallett told me that pirates had connections on land. They had families, they had community links, and all of these we don't know much about. As I was researching my dissertation turned previous book, The Pirate Next Door, the untold story of 18th-century pirates' wives, families, and communities, I kept encountering evidence of this mysterious woman who seemed oddly on the periphery of the story of the notorious Captain Kidd. Even the influential and authoritative early source book on pirates, called A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson, did not include Sarah in the lengthy chapter on Captain Kidd. Sarah was alive at the time the book was published in London in 1724, and it would have been possible for the author to interview her or people who knew her. Finding Sarah's initials, S.K., scratched on a colonial document at an archive in Massachusetts started me on a thrilling journey to learn more about her. I would soon learn that her initials marked the spot where love and law divide. To research Sarah's story, I had to use a variety of sources because women left little record of their affairs. Most women, including Sarah, could not write. Men owned all the property and exercised most of the legal rights at the time. I read the contextual history of pirates and of the time period to learn the political, economic, and cultural events that shaped Sarah's life. I was able to find some important primary sources of Sarah's, such as her petition to regain her seized property from the governor of Massachusetts, Lord Belmont, and her last will and testament. Many of the ancient sources that I relied on were handwritten, and I transcribed over 250 of them to make them easier to work with. I visited archives in the places Sarah and Captain Kidd had been, including those in New York, Boston, and Rhode Island. I traced Sarah's steps in the surroundings she visited, especially in Manhattan, where she spent most of her life. I also found great resources in the Admiralty papers at the National Archives in London. I found a rich cache of letters that were in a sea chest in Captain Samuel Burgess's pirate ship when it was captured by a British privateer in 1699. The letters were in the pirate's mailbag and contained a few letters from Captain Kidd's crewmen aboard the Adventure galley to their wives, and from the wives to Kidd's crewmen. The letters are dated from 1695 to 1699, and they show that correspondence was conducted thousands of miles across the globe between Indian Ocean pirates and North American colonists, and that there was successful and direct communications between New York and Madagascar and back again. No letters from Sarah or Captain Kidd were among these letters, and none have survived, but there is every likelihood that they communicated during his 3-year voyage through the Mariner's Mail Service located on Ascension Island, a remote outpost in the Atlantic. New York merchant captains trading with the pirates in Madagascar stopped for fresh turtle meat and dropped off and collected the mail that was left under a rock with a hole in it near the harbor. This letter from the wife of Kidd's crewman, Jacob Horn, was especially helpful and informative. Writing from their home in Flushing, New York, On June 5th, 1698, Sarah Horn told her husband, quote, "We hear abundance of flying news concerning you." This meant that word had spread from port to port and ship to ship, and that there was trouble aboard the Adventure Galley. That trouble, we would later learn, was murder, mutiny, and piracy. To further understand the maritime world in which Captain Kidd lived, I attended a workshop at the National Archives in London and conducted research with scholars from the Prize Papers Project, which is a collaborative effort at the National Archives with the University of Oldenburg in Germany to research and to categorize the thousands of yet unopened documents captured by the British in wartime in the 17th and 18th century. I examined trial records, depositions, personal correspondence, ship's logs, cargo inventories, and even a mariner's personal journal that was worn from wear in his front pocket. The manuscript room at the Library of Congress was a terrific resource, and Captain Kidd's own recorded statements gave strong evidence of his love and devotion for Sarah. Archivists and other historians I met were enthusiastic and helpful during my research, as was my trusty research assistant, Higgins, a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel named for a runaway pirate, Jeremiah Higgins. Here he is inspecting the galleys of the pirate's wife. Unfortunately, there are no contemporary paintings of Sarah Kidd. She can't be seen that way. But in 1911, the artist Jean-Léon Jerome Fair created this painting of Captain Kidd in New York Harbor. The attractive, beautifully dressed woman with a lace fan holding Captain Kidd's hand on the deck of his ship is an interesting rendition of a woman who captured Captain Kidd's attention. One contemporary of Sarah's described her as lovely and accomplished, and the woman in this painting is certainly lovely. Kidd's velvet knee-length coat, a sword at his side, and a tri-cornered hat are historically accurate depictions of the attire of the period and what he would have worn as a successful sea captain. His gesture towards his lovely visitor, a suave, gentlemanly bow, and a warm clasp of her hand, fits with the charming demeanor he was known to display. While this painting is a figment of an artist's imagination, and in 1911, we did not know the story of Captain Kidd and Sarah, there is coincidentally some historical semblance of truth in it. Born Sarah Bradley around 1670, the future pirate's wife arrived in New York from England with her widowed father and two brothers when she was 14 years old. At 15, she was married to one of the richest men in the colony, a much older, wealthy New York merchant named William Cox. When Cox died tragically 4 years later in 1689, Sarah married a Dutch merchant and mariner named John Ort. It was then when she met Captain William Kidd, a well-dressed, well-respected man with whom she began a friendship. Captain Kidd was Sarah's third husband. Sarah was a twice-widowed 21-year-old, considered one of the most eligible, sought-after women in New York. When she and Kidd married just 2 days after her second husband's death. While the circumstances might appear suspect for Sarah and Kidd to marry so soon after her second husband's untimely demise, Kidd and Sarah were stellar members of polite New York society. They were New York's power couple. No untoward behavior was ever proved. At the time of their marriage, the well-dressed 37-year-old sea captain, who spoke with a hint of a Scottish accent, was one of the most respected men in Manhattan. He was a celebrated war hero and sought-after privateer. A privateer was hired by the government to legally plunder and seize enemy ships. He was a legal pirate. During wartime, the resources of warring countries were stretched to the limit, and privateers were extra hired hands who owned their own armed vessel and served as an auxiliary to England's navy. A privateer's assignment was detailed in a document called a letter of marque and reprisal. He had investors in the captured, and the captured prizes and cargo was shared with them. The captain and crew received a smaller proportion of the take. There was sometimes a fine line between a legal privateer and an outlaw pirate. Many a privateer, once out at sea and beyond the reach of the authorities, turned pirate to avoid having to share the loot. There were other reasons. Turning pirate was an attractive alternative for some men, especially those with wives and families, because pirates lived in a highly civilized democratic society. They were well paid when the going was good, and they were treated fairly. Pirates lived by a set of rules called articles, and each pirate had to sign his name, or, if he could not write, leave his mark as an X to join the crew of a pirate ship. With that commitment to be true to his fellow brethren of the coast, as they were called, came benefits. Each pirate had an equal vote, and most were given an equal share of the booty. There was a form of health insurance, life insurance, and retirement benefits. The pirate community was designed to support and maintain the relationships on land while they were at sea. For example, if a pirate died in action, his share of the booty was smuggled halfway around the world and given to his family. Turning pirate was a risky and dangerous choice, but for some men, a merry life and a short one was their motto. Sarah and Kid's wedding took place in Manhattan on a rainy Saturday, May 16, 1691. It was a day of high drama and grisly 17th-century justice. England was at war with France. Pirates were plundering the high seas, and two traitors, the self-appointed governor Jacob Leicester and his son-in-law Jacob Milborne, were hanged for treason against King William and Queen Mary in the public square. Sarah and Kid attended the hanging after their wedding. A public hanging was an event everyone turned out for. It was a carnival-like source of entertainment. The stark contrast of the day, a love match and an execution, foreshadowed the dark drama that would be their life together. The Kids lived in a mansion Sarah inherited from her first husband, located on the corner of Pearl and Hanover Street in the Hanover Square neighborhood of Manhattan. The waterfront property faced a wall, now called Wall Street, in the financial district of Manhattan. Coincidentally, their home was just a few blocks from the offices of my publisher, Hanover Square Press, an imprint of HarperCollins. I like to think that Sarah found my publisher for me. Around 1692, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, and in 1694, she had another daughter, little Sarah. During the colonial period, giving birth was a social and a bonding event where women looked after one another. Sarah's babies would have been born at home in a separate area from the main living quarters. Men were not involved in the birthing process, so Captain Kidd would have been busy somewhere else. It was the job of women, relatives, neighbors, friends, and elders in the colony to act as midwives and to assist in the delivery. Special birthing linens were prepared and laid out. Sarah would have used a birthing stool, or perhaps a loved one held her upright and supported her as she progressed through labor. In the early stages, Sarah would have acted as the hostess of this festive occasion. It was an old English tradition for new mothers to serve groaning cakes, a nutritious baked good made of spices, molasses, rum, apples, and carrots, and to go with it, groaning beer. As they waited for the blessed moment, the women would entertain themselves with gossip, jokes, and stories. In 1696, Captain Kidd was given a dream job, 2 privateering commissions from the King, William III. His investors were some of the most important men in England, including the newly appointed governor of New York and Massachusetts, Richard Coote, known as Lord Belmont. Belmont's complicated relationship with Kidd would lead to Kidd's tragic downfall. In his brand new ship, one that looked like this, the Adventure Galley was a 287-ton warship with 3 tall masts, square rigged sails, and 34 big guns. It was a hybrid ship called a galley, meaning that it could be rowed as well as sailed. His job was to hunt French enemy ships and to rid the seas of pirates who disrupted international trade. His commissions were for 1 year. His initially unsuccessful voyage led to frustration, mutiny, and eventually Kidd's turn to piracy. Sarah was key to Kidd's fight for his life against the men who accused him of turning from privateer to pirate. She and their daughter spent time with Kidd on his pirate ship, and Sarah helped Kidd hide his stolen treasure. As an accomplice to an outlaw, she was arrested and imprisoned with him in Boston. Once released, Sarah helped construct the narrative Captain Kidd presented in his defense. She ensured he was taken care of in jail. She worked tirelessly to help secure a pardon, and she even tried to help plot an escape. After Kidd was executed in 1701, Sarah lived another 40 years. She reinvented herself, and she managed to go from one half of a criminal outlaw couple back to a high society socialite. She secured her family's inheritance, remarried, and had more children, and lived the rest of her life as a prominent and respectable citizen. She even learned how to write her full name. Sarah Kidd's extraordinary life is a rare example of the kind of life that pirates' wives lived during the Golden Age of Piracy. Hers is a tale about love, marriage, motherhood, and survival. Sarah's life, and particularly her transformation from a New York socialite to a stateless outlaw, sheds new light on the political, economic, and cultural events of the late 17th and 18th centuries. From her, we learn about the economic hardships of widowhood, the political repercussions of piracy, the effects of war on the new and emerging colonial economies, the business of slavery. Her life tells a broader story about how certain women were able to assert their will and reclaim their agency within the oppressive strictures of colonial America. During her 74 years, Sarah lived through 7 British monarchs, 21 New York governors, and she experienced firsthand the Golden Age of Piracy. She survived 4 husbands and 3 of her 5 adult children. The Pirate's Wife, the remarkable true story of Sarah Kidd, recasts the image of Captain Kidd from a diabolical pirate to a flawed but decent man who tried to please his investors and protect his wife and children. He was a pirate, but not one with a black heart. Sarah's initials, SK, scratched on a few colonial documents, gave clues to her existence. Those bold pen strokes reveal a history we have only imagined, the dangerous, difficult, and thrilling life of a pirate's wife. They shed unexpected light on a young colonial woman caught up in a world of politics, passion, and grisly 18th-century justice. The unknown SK is finally identified. She is Sarah Kidd, the First Lady of Pirates.
Daphne, that was wonderful. What a remarkable story you have shared with us.
Thank you.
Have so many great questions that have come in, and we learned so much through your presentation. Thank you for those remarkable images. We have folks from all different levels of knowledge and experience here on screen and online with us, but I wanted to just sort of back up a little bit. And just, if you could just remind us what New York was like back then, what did it look like? How did it, what was it like in terms of, Boston versus New York versus Philadelphia? I mean, it sounds to me as though New York was sort of the pirate haven at that point. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate, because in 1696, the colonial governor of New York, Benjamin Fletcher, was very welcoming to pirates because the economy was very weak. In England was at war with France, and so the economies were stretched very thin. So the governor, Fletcher, thought that if he let pirates in, he could supplement the New York economy. So for a fee, he allowed them in, the fee which he pocketed, and they brought in their stolen goods and sold it at rock bottom prices to the merchants, because pirates didn't have any overhead. And that gave merchants an opportunity to make a nice profit. They were then able to build homes and start businesses and build more of an infrastructure into the very primitive looking New York colony at the time. So yes, it was a pirate haven
Uniquely.
for a while, but then Governor Fletcher got retired, and a new governor came in who was law and order, Lord Belmont, whose job was to stamp out piracy in the colonies.
And Belmont, what was his jurisdiction? Was it just New York proper? Or do you have any idea how far his jurisdiction went?
So in those days, governors had a wide jurisdiction. So Governor Belmont, Lord Belmont, was the governor of New York, of Massachusetts, and of New Hampshire.
Oh, wow. Okay. And it sounds as if you did some research also in, Massachusetts, of course, and Rhode Island. Were there particular favorable ports to pirates in that region as well? Or is this, truly a New York thing?
Well, Block Island is where Captain Kidd went, and where Sarah Kidd spent some time until they rendezvoused. I don't want to give away the story, but Block Island was a very special place for Sarah Kidd. And Gardiner's Island is also a place where Captain Kidd went and buried some treasure.
Oh, okay.
But it had to be dug up. So it's not there anymore.
Yeah, no, we shouldn't. We won't all go on a field trip out there then. And Because I know so little, just, give me a sense. What was going on down in Philadelphia, do you have any sense of Jamestown, any ports south of New York that was this everywhere, or how did it work?
No, this was mainly, well, I focused mainly on New York because the New York merchants were very active in the pirate trade. They would supply the pirates who were in Madagascar, which is an island to the east of South Africa, and they would bring them supplies and be paid an exorbitant amount of money for these supplies of things like combs and hats and shoes and rum and lemons. And the New York merchants ran a shuttle between New York and Madagascar and back again.
Wow. The one question that we have, turning to those, is where was Captain Kidd active? And you mentioned Madagascar. What were his other places of calling? Where did he stop and do what he did?
So his voyage was to go and capture pirates in the Indian Ocean. That was his assignment. That was his assignment as a privateer. So he went, he picked up a ship and his assignment in London. He went to New York to meet, to staff up, to get crew, and to spend time with Sarah and their children. And then he went from New York down around the Cape by Madeira and the Cape of Good Hope, and then up into the Indian Ocean. And that's where he spent time trying to find enemy ships to capture.
Amazing story. Tell us, I'm going back to questions here. You mentioned Sarah sailing a bit with her husband. And, questions have come in. Did wives ever go to the sea, as in the case of whalers, is one question we have in advance. And I know Sarah was with him when he came back in sort of infamy, but were there women who ever went out with their husbands as pirates that you know of?
Women were not allowed on pirate ships because they were considered a distraction to the crew. And so women, it was part of the articles that no women were allowed on some articles. Captains said no women on the ship because of the distraction. There were women who were pirates, but they weren't in Sarah's category. Sarah was not a pirate. She was a pirate's wife.
Yes. The questions coming in about how she felt, which would be hard to know. But did she condone his pirate activities? As I understand it, she just wanted to keep her family together at all costs. What do you think about this thought that she condoned his activities?
Well, I'm sure she felt very strongly that piracy was not a good idea. She saw pirates in colonial New York since she was 14 years old when she arrived from England. But she believed her husband. Captain Kidd claimed he was innocent. Until his death, he claimed he was innocent, and that it was his men who mutinied who made him turn pirate. So Sarah believed him and did everything she could to assist him, to help him get a pardon and save his life.
Yeah. Stand by your man.
Stand by your man. Yeah.
Stand by your man.
Yeah.
Mores really changed as you went from Fletcher to Belmont. It sounded like the whole political environment in the colonies changed at that point. And a question has come up here, just for those of us who don't know a whole lot about this. Could you clarify the difference between a privateer and a pirate?
Sure. A privateer was a legal pirate. He was a privateer, which is what Captain Kidd was, with his letters of marque and reprisal. I showed the slide of that in the presentation. and that was an assignment to go and capture enemy ships and to take the cargo and bring it back to London, and the investors split the goods. A pirate is not legal. He is an outlaw, and he doesn't share the booty. And many men turned pirate because life at sea was very hard, and to go out and work for someone else, especially for 3 years, and have not much to show, and then have to bring it back and share it and get not much. They decided that they would rather have more for themselves.
And in the pirate scenario, I mean, people do split profits, but it's split among, it's not, you don't have investors in New York and London. You sort of have who's on your boat and you split it among those people. And there must be a real hierarchy on that boat as to who gets what, or who gets knocked off so somebody else gets it. It's a violent world.
Well, they didn't really knock anybody off, but there was a hierarchy. The captain got more shares than others, but there was a hierarchy. The cooper, who was the carpenter, and the ship's surgeon, those two were the primary threesome that got the most, and then they pretty much divided it equally. There were boys on pirate ships, and they got half of a share.
In terms of the records that we can find about boats floating, doing their thing at that time, is it easy to tell? Are there pirate records? Is it easy to tell which boats are privateers, which boats are pirate boats, and which boats are, in the service of the king and the queen? What do you see there for distinguishing ships in records?
Well, in the records, they would certainly be under two categories: the listing by the owners as privateers, and then the way they knew that a ship turned pirate was when they got captured, and then they would have the name of that ship.
Okay, so more questions. Is there a memorial or grave site for Captain Kidd? And if so, where is it located? I don't think you want to give away what happens here, but London is a thought, New York is a thought. Is there any sort of anything left for him? I know
No.
he's in Trinity Church, New York.
No, Captain Kidd was not buried. He was left to hang in chains, to be eaten by the birds. He was an example for everyone thinking about turning to piracy, as this is not the thing to do. This is what happens to you. So there is no, there's nothing you can visit.
Nothing you can visit. We can read your book, and there are other books.
Yes.
So before we turn to some of the live questions, questions have come up about your writing process, the time of day you write, the place, how do you stay disciplined? Can you share any information on that?
So my writing process is I work 7 days a week. I'm at my desk at 5:30 in the morning. I take breaks to go to the gym, to go for a swim, to go for a bike ride. I have my little research assistant, Higgins, who also insists I take him out for a good walk. I keep a notepad by my nightstand because I think of things during the night and I write them down. I'm always working. I'm always thinking about this, even if I'm with friends or a dinner or something. It's always when I'm in the middle of a book project, and I'm sure this is the case for many writers, you're always thinking about it and you're always trying to understand it or develop your character or put it together. For me, putting together Sarah's story was like putting together a 10,000 piece puzzle. And sometimes at the end of a long day, I usually knock off around 7 o'clock at night. And I often work until I just can't work anymore. I'm just so tired. But I often end the day trying to figure something out. And often I wake up in the middle of the night with the answer.
That really is the best time to sort things out. I agree with you. Waking up in the middle of the night with the answer, which usually turns out to be a good one.
Yes, yes.
Questions coming in live. Do you have any information about whether she connected with other pirate wives throughout her life? Did she leave any other records behind besides legal? And yeah, no, I think I'll stop there with that question.
So she did connect with other pirate wives. In 1707, she signed a petition to Queen Anne that was 47 Madagascar pirate wives, very specific. 47 Madagascar pirate wives, asking Queen Anne to please pardon their husbands and let them keep his stolen loot because it was all they had to live on. Now, at the time that Sarah Kidd signed that, Captain Kidd was already dead, but it shows that she clearly felt that his stolen loot she was entitled to. So yes, it was a sisterhood, and she was in touch with them.
Many people are curious about her descendants and what you know. You mentioned a certain number of living children, and what do we know after that, up to the present day?
So Sarah outlived a couple of her children. Her daughter, little Sarah, with Captain Kidd, predeceased her, and Sarah, Big Sarah, our Sarah, took extraordinary measures. On the day that her daughter died, she went to her lawyer, she secured witnesses, and she added a codicil to her will to protect and provide for little Sarah's children. Her son Christopher, by her fourth marriage, she had 3 sons by a marriage after Captain Kidd, and he predeceased Sarah. And then her youngest son, Henry, died 4 months after Sarah. I do know that Sarah's descendants on her daughter's side continued to use Trinity Church in New York, which was where Sarah worshiped and was her sacred, peaceful place, and where she's buried. And the records go as far as 1800. Sarah died in 1744. And after that, the records go cold, but there was a fire and there were lots of records that were burned. So there's no record of what happened after that. And I haven't met any of her descendants, and I gave it a good try to find some.
I think we've surfaced at least one for you. So we'll put you in touch.
Okay.
A question has come in about sort of her social world at that point. What did her friends and family think about her marriage and her subsequent life with Captain Kidd, and also her life after Captain Kidd? Did they see her, or did they shun her? I know her father remained very helpful to her, but what was her world like in this bit of infamy?
Well, when she married Captain Kidd, he was a very choice fellow. He was a war hero. He was the man of the hour. He had just been given a reward from the colony of New York of 150 pounds, which was a lot of money back then. So her friends and family.
Scotsman. He was a handsome Scotsman.
He was a handsome Scotsman with a hint of a Scottish accent.
Uh-huh.
And he was very well regarded. He was a very talented mariner. I think her friends and family would have been delighted for her that she married this nice guy. And as I said, the circumstances of her second husband's death, nothing was ever proven. And we don't it's not known how he died or how he died or where he died. It was in New York, though, because she quickly administered his estate, but he didn't leave a will, so we don't know a lot about that. And the fact that he didn't leave a will kind of tells me that maybe it was very sudden the way he died. So I think initially Sarah went into this not ever expecting that her life would turn out the way it did. How everyone reacted to her, that I don't know. I mean, there's no records of that. She was destitute after Captain Kidd was tried and convicted. All her belongings, her house, her real estate, even her slaves were taken because those were under the category of assets. So she was homeless and destitute, and she had to make her way and begin again. And she did. She recreated herself.
And she was quite a young woman at that point. I mean, she had a lot of her life left to live.
Yes, she was in her 30s, early 30s.
You've inspired many folks to one of them going out to break down a brick wall of their research about their family. And we're wondering if you have advice for others. One person has said, I have a pirate privateer ancestor and would love to research both my great-grandmother as well as otherwise. Where do I look? A second person, where did you start your research? I had no idea wives would be so noteworthy. So for those of us starting off, do you have any advice about researching pirates and pirate wives?
Well, what I did was I went to American Ancestors and accessed your billions of records and did a search there. But I also did enormous amount of legwork, and that is going to the archives and looking for information about Sarah and Captain Kidd and anyone who knew her and lived in that time in her neighborhood in colonial New York. I would suggest, first of all, read everything that you can get your hands on about the time period of your ancestor in the location of where your ancestor lived, to get a sense of the community that they lived in, and then start researching the community. You need to start small before you go real big. So I did it that way, and it's the only way I know how to do it. And my research process is to collect all my information. I keep incredible source notes and bibliography, very specific, because you have to know where your information comes from. But I created a timeline so I could see the events that took place in her life and how her life changed over time, and the things that influenced her and affected her that caused her to react the way she did. So what I would say to all your viewers who want to go do your research is start out looking on these databases of, well, American Ancestors has, I think, the largest collection now, because you continue to add to it like daily. I also hired a genealogist at American Ancestors and sat down with her, because some of the documents were very, very difficult to read, and they're experts at that. And there was one will that I just could not, with all the documents that I had transcribed, this one was just chicken scratch. I could not find a way to find it out, but it was very important. So I hired a genealogist at American Ancestors, and it was really worth the time. And she produced a report that I use so much. It has coffee stains on it because I kept it right next to my computer. So if you're going to be serious about it, you need to invest a great deal of time. But it's very fascinating, and even if you go down a rabbit hole, it's always worth it. You
It's
always learn
history.
something
It's
you never knew.
fascinating history.
Yeah, it's
And
fascinating.
a last question here, and I know you and I have both talked about this, how sad it is that there are no real great portraits of her. One of our viewers has said, why do you suppose there are no portraits of her, especially if she was a successful socialite and long-lived? What a loss. Any thoughts on that before we turn to your reading?
That's a great question. I certainly wish I knew what she looked like. I know she must have been very, very attractive. But there weren't a lot of paintings of women in Sarah's time. She arrived in New York in 1680, and when she died in 1744, there were not a huge collection. And she may have been considered, not as important in the community as some of the other colonists.
Well, we really thank you for making her important again.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you so much for all this insight and for your answers. This has been eye-opening and myth-busting, this conversation. And I'm sorry, everyone, that we can't get to all the questions. There are just too many, and they are all very good, but do read the book. It's fantastic. As we do for each author in the American Inspiration series, we've asked Daphne to read to us briefly from her book. So in closing, I'll come back after, but back to you, Daphne.
Sure. I'm going to read from the prologue. Sarah Kidd laid in a weakened state in the bedroom of her Manhattan mansion. A highly contagious lethal disease raged through the colony, striking young and old, rich and poor, black and white. It was September 12th, 1744, and the 74-year-old Sarah had first taken to her bed to get warm under the soft quilts and to rest her head on the goose down pillows. Then the chills, fever, and fatigue set in. She was nearly certain she had contracted the deadly disease everyone called diphtheria. As a precaution, she asked her family and friends to stay at a safe distance. She arranged for soft foods and a soothing drink made from the medicinal herbs in her garden to be left outside her bedroom door. Her mind wandered in a fever-induced haze. She closed her eyes and remembered herself in another time and place. She was a young woman with her husband, Captain William Kidd, on his pirate ship, the St. Antonio, a vessel laden with gold, silver, and jewels. As his closest confidant, she learned that he'd buried some of his stolen treasure for safekeeping, and he described to her where it was hidden. She was not to tell a soul. For more than 40 years, since his death in 1701, Sarah, the pirate's wife, kept his secret safe. Not even her 5 children knew. She alluded to it in her will, noting that she had assets in the city of New York and elsewhere. She did not identify elsewhere. Sarah worried about the consequences if her children were caught with stolen pirate loot. Her strong instincts told her it was best to leave well enough alone. As she thought back over her life, not all of her memories were fond ones, especially the time when she was a pirate's wife. But now the memory of the hardships and the heartbreak had softened, and Sarah wouldn't have traded it for anything. She felt proud, very proud, to have been a pirate's wife, and she wore the title as a badge of honor. Sarah repeated a prayer as her condition worsened. Almighty God, have mercy on my soul, and pardon and forgive me all my sins and offenses, so that I may, after this miserable life, Arise with our Savior, Jesus Christ. She became delirious from the fever and shook uncontrollably. The sheets were soaked with her perspiration. Still, the thought of that secret weighed on her, as well-kept secrets often do. As she prayed for forgiveness, she may have thought it was time to identify elsewhere. To her 3 children who paced downstairs in the sitting room. It wasn't long before Sarah developed a sore throat that felt like a razor when she swallowed. She tried to speak, but it hurt so much she could only whisper. Her daughter, Elizabeth Kidd Troop, peeked through the keyhole to check on Sarah. The once vigorous woman now appeared very small among the many furnishings and tasseled curtains. She looked pale in her white cotton bedclothes and so frail lying on her side, facing the door. Elizabeth saw her mother's lips moving, mouthing words, but she could not hear her. She strained through the keyhole to hear what she might be whispering. Elizabeth called for her brothers, William and Henry, who had stepped outside on the front stoop that faced the harbor. The cry of the seagulls seemed to signal the alarm. Elizabeth told them to hurry. Each took a turn at the keyhole, looking and listening. Sarah's breathing was loud and strained as she gasped for air. The 3 of them looked at each other with tears in their eyes when the room fell quiet. There was not a sound, not even a whisper. For over 300 years, treasure hunters have scoured the North American eastern seaboard, trying to find where elsewhere is. That secret is with Sarah, buried in the churchyard of Trinity Church, Wall Street in Manhattan.
Lovely. What a remarkable story of family. I love the mystery element, the adventure, and I just love that it's a woman's tale. So, Daphne, thank you for that. And a reminder to our audience that copies of The Pirate's Wife are available from our partners at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Mass. For those of us immersed in colonial history, Daphne's book is a great window in on women's lives, family lives, in a time that it is so hard for us to understand now, especially the ins and outs of cultural mores and the lot of women who had so few rights back then. I really learned so much. Use the code AMINT23 as you order, and Porter Square Books will mail you a copy at any speed you want in any direction. Now moving toward closing, we at American Ancestors NEHGS are delighted to have presented tonight's author talk. If you're researching a time in history, a person, or a family, please think of us and our resources. NEHGS members can access our digital archives and databases, 1.4 billion searchable records any time of day or night. Free to the public, you can chat with one of our genealogists, and our Brew Family Learning Center hosts many educational programs for family historians. You can see in what's listed on screen here that we cover all sorts of topics, places, and times. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and connect. And for you literary sorts, join us for more author talks in the American Inspiration series. On May 8, we're presenting a hybrid program broadcast from the Boston Public Library. Professors Chad Williams and Kendra Field will be discussing Williams's new book, The Wounded World, W.E.B. Du Bois and the First World War. Come in person or join us online for this free program. On May 23rd, in a virtual event, we'll be looking at Western history. Mark Lee Gardner will present his new book, The Earth is All That Lasts, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and the Last Stand of the Great Sioux Nation. And on June 5 in the afternoon, we're back in colonial America, looking at the ingenious creative work of Massachusetts merchants. Don't miss hearing from Dror Goldberg about his book, just reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, Easy Money, American Puritans and the Invention of Modern Currency. Okay, back to tonight, truly winding down. Thank you, Daphne, for this wonderful program. for your
Thank you.
research, your insight, really tremendous. And I know you and I both want to thank my colleague, Kelly Nagel, behind the
Thank you,
scenes, and
Kelly.
Kathleen McKenzie.
Thank
And
you.
to the audience out there in Zoom land, thank you. We are grateful, all of us, for your tuning in, for your questions, for your interest in history. We will hope to see you soon again. And for now, we wish you all a very good evening. Daphne, to you too. Thank you all, and
Thank
have
you,
a good
Margaret.
night.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.